stop everything you are doing right now, because what a Los Angeles courtroom is about to lay on the record is not a music story, it is not a celebrity story, and it is not a rumor, it is a documented, forensically catalogued, 40-terabyte reckoning that is about to detonate the entire career of the artist the internet knew as D4vd. This is the case of David Anthony Burke, and by the time you finish this breakdown, you are going to understand why prosecutors, private investigators, former classmates of a 14-year-old girl, ex-moderators of his own fan Discord, and Fortnite teammates who now cannot sleep are all pointing to the same terrifying conclusion: the persona was the paper trail, the lyrics were the map, and the confession was hiding in plain sight for nearly 4 years while millions of people streamed it on repeat. David Anthony Burke was taken into custody on April 16, 2026, in connection with the investigation into the death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and within 96 hours of that arrest the district attorney's office filed a stack of charges that turned a viral missing persons story into one of the most closely watched homicide prosecutions in California this decade. First-degree homicide. Unlawful conduct involving a minor. Unlawful handling of human remains. A financial gain special circumstance built directly on top of the release calendar of his debut album. Burke has denied every count filed against him, and the case is now inside the official judicial track. His preliminary hearing began on July 21, 2026, and it is the stage on which the DA's 40-terabyte evidentiary pile is finally being cracked open in front of a judge who will decide whether this becomes the trial the internet has been waiting for since a decomposing body was pulled from the front trunk of a Tesla registered in Burke's name. But before any of that courtroom weight lands, you have to understand something the algorithm has been trying to bury from you for months. The story that Burke told the world about who he was, the shy, homeschooled kid who wrote poetry inside a bedroom closet and stumbled into fame through a Fortnite copyright strike, is the exact same story the state now argues was engineered as camouflage. Because inside that same origin myth, according to filings, are the digital fingerprints of a grown teenager reaching through a gaming lobby to make contact with a 10-year-old girl. To see how any of this became possible, the timeline has to be rewound years earlier, long before the Coachella booking, long before the sold-out European legs of the Withered tour, long before the first sync placement, and long before Celeste Rivas Hernandez was old enough to be in middle school. Burke has described his own childhood in a stack of interviews that, in hindsight, sound less like promotional press and more like a psychological blueprint the public simply refused to decode. He was pulled out of public school. He was placed into a computer-based homeschool track, not the group-based homeschooling model that emphasizes weekly meetups, sports leagues, and structured peer contact, but the isolated, screen-only version that he has repeatedly said left him more disconnected than any other period of his life. He said he begged, almost every day, to be sent back to a regular classroom. He said that request was refused. And he said the friends he had believed were real evaporated the second his physical presence left the building. That specific isolation, an adolescent boy left alone with a screen and a gaming console for the majority of his waking hours, is not a footnote. It is the environment prosecutors are now arguing produced the behavior they intend to prove. Because from inside that isolation, Burke did not simply drift into music. He drifted into worlds. He drifted into anime with themes that reward morally inverted protagonists. He drifted into manga where the detective and the killer are the same character. He drifted into Fortnite lobbies where, according to his own words, he spent hours letting strangers unload their private lives on him, kids using video games to hide from their own homes, opening up to a stranger they only knew as a voice on Discord. And Burke has openly said he absorbed those voices, cataloged them, wrote them into characters, and later stitched them into the songs that made him famous. He has called that habit people watching. The state is now going to argue that what he calls people watching was something else entirely. By his own on-camera account, Burke created an alter ego before he ever had a record deal. He described it as an evil version of himself, an agent of chaos, in his words, who would commit crimes at random moments that the detective version of him would then be forced to solve. He explained it in interviews with the same relaxed cadence a normal person might use to describe a favorite hobby. He compared it to Fight Club. He referenced Tyler Durden by name. And he built the character out into a public persona he called Atami, the Japanese word for pain, which became the blindfolded figure at the center of his music videos, his stage design, and his merchandise. That persona is not being treated as art anymore. Since the arrest, it is being treated as a document. Now here is where the verified sequence of events becomes almost impossible to look away from. According to the DA's filings, Burke first made contact with Celeste Rivas Hernandez in January of 2022, through a gaming platform, when he was around 15 and she was around 10. That single sentence carries more weight than every headline written about this case combined, and it is the pillar every subsequent allegation is built on. The state is not alleging a moment of poor judgment. It is alleging a multi-year pattern that began in a Fortnite lobby, migrated to Discord, survived a welfare check by the Los Angeles Police Department, survived a family confiscating a phone, and continued through what prosecutors describe as a deliberate, financed circumvention of every protective adult in Celeste's life. Because in February of 2024, Celeste's family reported her missing for the first time. Riverside County Sheriff's deputies pulled her phone records. Burke's number was inside them. LAPD detectives showed up at his West Hollywood residence for a welfare check, told him directly, on the record, that Celeste was a runaway, that she was a minor, that she was being searched for. According to the state's filings, Burke told those officers he did not know her age. Investigators also recovered a photograph of Celeste from his phone during that same contact. 2 days later Celeste was returned home. Her parents took her phone away. The system, on paper, worked. And then, according to the DA's filings, Burke paid a classmate of Celeste's $1,000 in cash to deliver a brand new cell phone he had purchased specifically to re-establish contact with a girl he had just been informed by uniformed officers was a minor and a missing person. That is not an allegation of a lapse in judgment. That is the allegation of a deliberate, funded, executed workaround of both law enforcement and a family's protective intervention. And it is the exact allegation that turns this case from a tragedy into a prosecution. From that moment forward, according to the state, Celeste was traveling with him. Las Vegas. London, Texas, where his extended family lives. Rental properties tied to his professional infrastructure. And this is where a private investigator named Steve Pfizer enters the record. Pfizer was hired by the homeowner of one of those rental properties after the case became public, and he has publicly claimed that members of Celeste's own family had been to that residence, had been present with Burke and Celeste inside it, and were aware she had gone there on more than one occasion. Those are Pfizer's public claims. They have not been ruled on by any court. But if they are ever authenticated inside the courtroom's evidentiary machinery, they will detonate a second front in this story about who knew what and when, because that particular pattern of adult awareness is exactly what the online audience has been demanding answers on for months. Public reporting has already surfaced the fact that Celeste's mother has said she knew her daughter had a boyfriend named David, her brother has said the last time he saw his sister was when David picked her up to go to a movie, and her father has said he had never heard the name at all. 3 family members. 3 different levels of awareness. 1 missing 14-year-old girl. That contradiction alone is the reason the internet has refused to let this case fade. But the courtroom's evidentiary machinery is not built on rumor. It is built on receipts. And this is where the physical trail the state has assembled starts to feel less like a case file and more like a screenplay Burke's own alter ego might have written. According to the filings, on April 23, 2025, 1 day before the official release of the album Withered, and days before his world tour hit its final assembly stage, Burke arranged an Uber that picked Celeste up from her home in Lake Elsinore and delivered her to his Hollywood Hills residence at approximately 10:10 in the evening. Approximately 20 minutes after her arrival, according to the state, Burke began sending Celeste's phone text messages asking where she was. The DA's filings characterize those messages as manufactured, false records generated for the digital trail, designed to make it appear she had never made it to the house. That single detail, if it survives cross-examination, is the kind of premeditation-adjacent evidence that transforms a homicide filing into a first-degree case with special circumstances attached. And the receipts do not stop there. In the weeks that followed, according to the DA, a series of purchases were made under a false name, Victoria Mendez. On April 24, a shovel. On May 1, chainsaws. On May 5, a body bag and an inflatable pool. On July 7, a burn cage. Small blue plastic fragments recovered from Celeste's remains were later identified by the county medical examiner as materially consistent with inflatable pool plastic. That forensic link, plastic fragments embedded in a body, matched to a plastic purchase made under a false identity, is one of the tightest physical connections in the entire case, and it is precisely the kind of exhibit prosecutors love to walk a jury through slowly. Celeste's remains were found on September 8, 2025, inside the front storage compartment of an impounded Tesla registered to Burke, after employees at the impound facility noticed the odor and contacted authorities. That is not a rumor. That is not a claim. That is the moment the missing persons file was refiled as a homicide investigation and the moment the entire pop music trajectory of D4vd flipped inside out. Now layer the release calendar coincidence on top of that. Burke's viral breakout single, Romantic Homicide, was released on September 7th, the same calendar date as Celeste's birthday. That music video features imagery tied directly to the Atami persona. The internet noticed. The state noticed. Whether the date is coincidence or design is, at this stage, unproven, but in a courtroom where the financial gain special circumstance is already attached to the timing of the album Withered, no coincidence involving a release date is going to be treated as neutral. And this is where the retrospective analysis of Burke's own catalog becomes almost unbearable to read. Since the arrest, former moderators of his own fan Discord have come forward. A user identifying himself only as Will has publicly claimed he was granted access to Burke's YouTube watch history during his moderator tenure and that the account's viewing pattern in the months leading up to the April 23 date included searches on how to permanently delete Instagram conversations, tutorials on factory resetting a Mac, and viewings of a news report about missing young people in Virginia. Those claims have not been authenticated. They have not been introduced as exhibits. They may never be. But they are circulating, and they are shaping the way an entire generation of listeners is now rehearing songs they used to sing along to in their bedrooms. Former Fortnite teammates from a squad known as Chronic, the same lobby where Burke apparently played under the handle Chronic Ant, have also come forward publicly. Multiple players have said, on the record, that a young female voice was regularly present in Burke's lobbies. They said they assumed she was somebody's little sister. They said Burke joked about her openly, then deflected whenever the joke landed too hard. They said one of them was in a match with her the same week she was reported missing, and did not connect the voice to the news story until after the arrest. Every one of those testimonials is the kind of retroactive horror that turns a case into a cultural event, because it forces every viewer to ask the same question, what was I hearing, and I didn't know I was hearing it. Then there is the audio artifact. Prosecutors have made what defense analysts are describing as an extraordinary allegation, that material captured through a court-authorized wiretap, combined with forensic analysis of media connected to Burke's music, appears to contain a recording of the events of April 23 embedded inside creative content. That single sentence, if it is authenticated on the record, is the kind of exhibit that ends careers, ends debates, and ends the presumption of ambiguity that the defense has been leaning on since day one. But it is not authenticated yet. It is an allegation. And the defense team, led by Blair Burke, one of the most decorated criminal defense attorneys in the state of California, is going to fight the introduction of that material with everything the profession allows. Because the courtroom on the other side of this filing is not a soft one. Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman is running lead for the state. Silverman is a veteran of high-profile Los Angeles County prosecutions and is not the kind of DA who files special circumstance allegations she does not intend to defend at trial. LAPD detectives Justin Cheatham and Danielle Martin have already begun laying the digital and physical evidentiary foundation in open court, Cheatham on the iCloud data recovered from Burke's account, Martin on the physical evidence pulled out of the Hollywood Hills garage. That garage is now a critical location in the state's theory, because it is where the DA contends the purchases made under the Victoria Mendez name ultimately ended up. And every one of those exhibits is being tested, right now, under cross-examination by defense counsel, under oath, under the official rules of evidence that govern what any jury will ever be allowed to hear. Which brings us to the family, and to the silence, and to the reason a lot of the online audience refuses to fully close this loop. Because Celeste Rivas Hernandez was reported missing twice, once in February of 2024 and again in April of the same year, and by her own family's accounts, she was largely off the grid for more than 18 months before her remains were recovered. 18 months. A 14-year-old girl. And the private investigator Steve Fizer's public claims that family members had been present at a rental property connected to Burke, if authenticated, would force the entire question of adult accountability into a category no one wants to sit with. Her father has publicly denied ever hearing Burke's name. Her brother has publicly said Burke picked Celeste up for a movie. Her mother has publicly acknowledged knowing about a boyfriend named David. Rumors that Burke provided the family with financial support have circulated locally and have been publicly denied through counsel. Celeste's father, through attorney Patrick Steinfeld, has flatly stated that no contact and no money ever passed between them. Those denials are on the record. Whether they survive scrutiny is a separate question, and it is one the courtroom's evidentiary machinery may or may not ever answer. Now zoom back out, because the reason this case has consumed so much cultural oxygen is not any single exhibit. It is the pattern. It is the fact that a 15-year-old boy sat in an isolated homeschool program with unlimited internet access and, by his own words, exposed himself to material he has publicly said made him less reactive to things most people cannot look at once. It is the fact that he built a public artistic identity around a character who commits crimes the other half of him has to solve. It is the fact that he released a song called Romantic Homicide on a specific young girl's specific birthday. It is the fact that a welfare check flagged him as a person of interest in a missing child case in February of 2024 and he allegedly funded a workaround within days. It is the fact that a body was recovered from his vehicle. It is the fact that the shovel, the chainsaws, the pool, the burn cage, and the plastic fragments all trace back, on paper, to a single fabricated identity. And it is the fact that every single one of those threads is now being handled, sequentially, one witness at a time, inside a Los Angeles County courtroom with Beth Silverman on one side and Blair Burke on the other. David Anthony Burke has denied every count. He is presumed innocent unless and until the evidence establishes otherwise inside the official proceedings ahead. That presumption is not a formality. It is the exact standard the courtroom is bound to. But presumption is not silence, and it is not exoneration, and it is not a reason to look away from a verified sequence of events that has already reshaped how millions of listeners hear an entire discography. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14 years old when she was found. She was 10 years old when the state alleges the first contact was made. She was reported missing twice by a family whose accounts of what they knew do not fully align with one another. She spent the last 18 months of her life largely outside of any protective adult structure. And the man the state has charged with taking her life is a man whose public art told a story about a killer and a detective sharing the same body for nearly 4 years while the algorithm pushed the songs into millions of playlists. The preliminary hearing is where all of it, the wiretap allegation, the Victoria Mendez purchases, the iCloud data, the garage evidence, the Uber records, the manufactured text messages, the Discord watch history claims, the Fortnite teammate testimonials, the private investigator claims about the rental property, the family's contradictory accounts, begins the process of being tested inside a room where nothing survives that cannot survive cross-examination. That process has begun. It is going to run for weeks. And every single major development is going to reshape the story in ways the tabloids are not equipped to translate. That is the reason this breakdown exists. We are not here to skim the headlines. We are here to walk the entire evidentiary floor, one exhibit at a time, and give the record the weight it deserves. Hit the follow button and keep the bell active. This thread is only beginning to unravel, and the next courtroom day is going to answer questions that have been open since the Tesla was cracked. This is the case of David Anthony Burke. This is the case of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and this is only the beginning of what the record is about to say out loud.